Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 19th episode of Retuning Your Firm. And this is actually the 34th episode since we started this series. And we're in second lockdown still, but hopefully in a week or two we'll be back into new tiers. But quite what the difference is, nobody's really sure, I suspect, at times. So what are we going to talk about today? Firstly, well, I'd like to make sure that those who had enjoyed their time in the lounge. I've just been hearing from one of our participants today, Jeremy, that that's being used by his firm for a virtual staff cafe, which is quite an interesting way of bringing people together in this new virtual world that we live in. So please use it. What are today's themes? Well, these are an interesting group, actually. Passion. Now, there's very few times when I hear managing partners talk about passion. So I'm delighted that Michael Chissick, who, as many of you will know, is the very successful leader of law firm Field Fisher, is coming to talk about what he understands by the word passion, why he thinks that's very much part of the way that managing partners should be thinking about their role within the firm. Staying with the role of the managing partner, we also have self-care. They always say if you're in an aircraft and the oxygen mask come down, you should always put the oxygen mask on yourself before you give it to your child. And the same with the leader. If you're not looking after yourself, are you going to be a good leader? Are you going to take your firm to an optimal place? And we'll hear a little bit more about that from William. And I think the key word there is resilience, probably. And we're doing our sector trends. So we'll be seeing what's been going on, how are people feeling about all the usual elements, which again, government finds really helpful. So those are today's themes. Going through who's talking today on our panel in order of appearance: Michael Chissick, as I say, managing partner of Field Fisher. Welcome, Michael. William Johnson, who is the managing director of Openside Group, which is a specialist consultancy based on psychology. And then Jeremy Beard, who is the managing partner of Hayes McIntyre, obviously one of our regulars, and our anchor tenant, Francesca Lagerberg, who, as we know, is the global leader of network capabilities at Grant Thornton International. And there's very little that happens across that network that she's not aware of, which again gives a beautiful perspective to our own conversations. And yours truly, Richard Chaplin, the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum. So that's the lineup for today. Really pleased that you're all with us. Let's just run through my usual slide, I think, in a way, but I just think it's so wonderful. What are some 7 strategies? And so this came together back in April, so it's still very interesting. So think big. You've got to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast, as Lewis Carroll said. But also think small. You've got to keep those 2 in balance. In other words, think about angles that will resonate with your key audiences. Very much around, everybody's out there with their thought leadership and their white papers, and they're push. But where's the pull? What are the things that are really attracting the key audiences, whether it's your own people or clients? Both are equally important. Remember that you are the power of your relationships, and that means reciprocity. Address books only take you so far. You've actually got to think, how am I creating a win-win with that person? And if you can't create the win-win, as I always say, it's your problem, not theirs. Think about that. It's quite powerful. Do a campaign. Not a one-off. We're now in the 34th episode. That to me is a campaign. It's about bringing an audience together and creating a community, and we're delighted to have you on the show today. You have to drop convention. You have to go for new ideas and services, but baby in the bathwater doesn't mean to say that you therefore have to start and refashion your business model. Back in April, everybody wanted to redo their business model. That's not top. That's kind of towards the bottom of the list now. But get the strategy clear, get the purpose clear, and then focus on the new ideas and services as the way to deliver that strategy. Speed is of the essence. Speed is still of the essence. And remember, and it's a key point, you've got to market test your assumptions. In other words, you've got to articulate what it is you're doing. What are the assumptions? As any accountant will tell you, change the assumptions, you change the profits. It's quite easy. It's the same with anything you do. What you're really doing in launching anything is market testing those assumptions. And when they prove invalid, rather than if, because most will, sadly, as we all know from scientists, most experiments fail. That's normal. But if they prove invalid, amend them and then pivot in a new direction. And that technique is called Lean Start for those who are interested in that area. And finally, be entrepreneurial. You've got to keep listening and innovating. And as I always say, listening is the key word in that sentence. If you're not listening, then you're almost certainly not going to be giving your clients what they want or making sure your staff and your employees are in the best possible place. So thank you for Elena Kvitska of Globsec Bratislava speaking at a town hall think tank back in April. Wonderful, really key focus. I think every week we pick up one or more of those ideas. It really is a great way to keep us focused on retuning. Let's move on now to polls. As some of you will be aware, government really appreciates our polls. And this is a quote which they're very happy for me to share with you. at the end of the day, they are also, and they always say the middle market's very hard for them to actually tap into, because they can have a bilateral with a PwC, they can talk to a university about incubators and entrepreneurs. But the bit in the middle, you're all very busy, you've all got a lot on your day job, you don't really want to spend time talking to government. If there's a regulatory issue, sure, you'll jump on that, but that's usually done through some professional body anyway. But actually finding out what's going through the mind of the mid-market leaders is something that government finds really helpful. And of course, this group is par excellence tapping into that particular genre. But it goes wider than government. We also, as some of you may be aware, there was a report that came out, a very good report from the House of Lords back in October last month on the future UK-EU relationship. Now, given everybody is still unsure if there's even going to be a deal, this is a particularly pertinent paper, which I suggest you definitely read, because it covers all the key issues in a very nice, elegant way. And I think I'm correct in saying the only poll it actually mentioned was one of the ones on this particular show on the 12th of June, which we worked through with the UK TPO, which is obviously the Trade Policy Observatory, and City Ready, which is Birmingham University. So kind of jointly working with other organisations, which is a great way to work in life, I always think. So let's look at what happened last week. Well, we did a poll on apprenticeships, and we've been doing a polls on apprenticeships for government for a number of years now, but I thought it was quite interesting. So this again is for this audience. About 2/3 of you have apprentices. About 20% said think of doing so, and 12% not interested in doing so. I don't know if that's how representative that is. I say that's probably not across the mid-market. That's probably about right. Why? Well, a number of reasons. The one reading from the top: diversifying the workforce, enhancing reputation, and demonstrating commitment to employee development were the ones that came out quite strongly. You can obviously see the ones at the bottom which weren't scored as highly. They could only select up to 3, by the way, on this particular question. Equally, for those who aren't using the apprenticeship scheme, which is obviously the main government scheme, how come? And again, very much the word management comes out. Not enough time to train them, limited capacity to manage them, complexity of process, difficult to use, nothing that's particularly new there, sadly, but that's kind of the reason why people who aren't using the scheme gave for their reasons. To what extent are people actually just rebadging their existing workforce and calling them apprentices? To some extent, but mostly no, 71% hardly at all. So on the whole, these are new people, if you like. That's just obviously government's intention. When it comes to the pre-existing qualifications, certainly I know in the audit area this has been the case, there's kind of a mix. There's a group who say, well, almost all our apprentices are actually going for pre-existing quals, and then another group at the other end with not much in between saying no, they're new areas. Productivity as the output, is it worthwhile? Why would you do it? Well, hopefully because you're going to end up with more productive people working for you. And yes, that does come through. People are more productive, and also people consider them to be much more likely to still be with the firm after 12 months. So again, that another reason that people possibly invest in their people is because that way they hope they will then stay with them rather than just being a training ground, which is never always a perfect scenario to be in, as accountancy firms know to their cost through the years. Adverse consequences. Well, I suppose the good news is that 47% right at the bottom, no, none of these things have applied. So that's quite a big sort of positive, I think, in a way. The areas where there have been some complications, learning and development, has increased the cost of training a bit, and also, again, picking up the point about management of limited time and resources. And another one, which I think the finance directors, which obviously very eager to know a bit more about, is, what's the sort of financial implication? Because obviously the apprenticeship levy is being paid by certainly firms of mid and large size firms are all paying it. And I think there's a fairly strong message here that the payments are exceeding the receipts. I think some of the very small firms possibly are getting some more back, but mostly people seeing this as a place which is a place for a cost to the business, and not necessarily able to get the money back from Treasury. There's all sorts of rules about that. And the last one, which government kind of really is interested in, is, okay, well, if we were to actually bring about some changes and make some enhancements, which are the areas that would materially increase the average number of apprentices employed? 20% said none of them. In other words, not interested. Fair enough. Doesn't matter what government does, we're still not going to go for apprentices. But the key ones that come out, and you can see there's the top 3, the availability of suitable people, the rules, because we all know that the rules have been, what should we say, seen by many as being a bit onerous, and then just the general cost of running a scheme. The economic outlook really doesn't figure particularly high. Client demand doesn't really figure. Internal attitudes, political uncertainty, that doesn't even register amongst the top three. So from the message to government is these are the top three are the ones that you should be focusing on if you want there to be more apprentices. And as we sadly know at the moment across the UK as a whole, there are less apprentices than there were a year ago. And that isn't COVID related, that's to do with the scheme most people recognise. So having now run through last week's poll, let's do this one. And this is our monthly tracker. So some of you will hopefully have done this before, which is always good because then like for like always works brilliantly. And let's have a look at what the results show and see if we can quickly identify what that's telling us. Okay, what's happening this month? Well, increasing operational efficiency has kind of crept up a little bit from where it was before. A clear purpose and strategy remains very high, as does people skills. So there's no major changes to the question about priorities of the firm. In terms of the dip, again, the two most popular ones are none and 10%. We're down to 3% for anything above 10 really, so massive shift from April. I think people are now more settled into the new world. Is it a new future or a new normal? I'm not quite sure. In terms of the level of activity, people are now very much there's the emphasis on expansion. That hasn't been the case for some months, well, really since the beginning. So that's a very positive message there. And same applies around the flow of new work. Again, the expansion, the 23% in total contracting, 53% expanding. So that again is a positive message. And actually, this is really for the first time, I think, for some time on headcount. There is a modest the expansion on headcount is also showing, so that's quite a good sign, because really up to now pretty much every month we've had a pretty significant focus on headcount contracting, and that now is beginning to move, possibly not significant but at least modest expansion. In terms of the people working away, the portion of people likely to be working from home, again, firms where everybody is going to be back at work, it remains 0%. Everyone working from home about 10%, and that's a little bit less than before, and around half is the kind of the sort of the general area, with 3/4 and quarter around about the same. But again, there's obviously a variation in that, but what's very clear is that hybrid working is here to stay, and that, as I mentioned, is all after the pandemic has eased, and with the vaccine that may be closer than we had dared hope. In terms of the office space requirements, I don't think anybody wants more. About 40% want about the same, and then there's about another 50% plus who are going to be less. So again, the emphasis here is on less office space. What are the things that are stopping firms achieving their optimal performance? The poor economic outlook remains very, very high, and the financial health of the client base, which wasn't even on the list, I don't think, 9 months ago, again, is also very high at 60%. The others are all quite a lot smaller in terms of impact. It's interesting. Last month, I think poor economic outlook was 80%. So I think it's possibly now beginning to balance a bit. Which are the areas that carry weight in partner discussions? Again, we have this kind of marketing. On this occasion, finance is slightly ahead, but marketing and finance are the two areas, or new clients, if you like, rather than marketing, are the two areas which carry the most weight. Client service, which always traditionally was probably one of the top ones, has fallen away quite a lot. Innovation and technologies isn't really there, and Michael may have thoughts on that. Operational performance obviously is the other one. So there is a barrier there. And in terms of how are our leaders doing, and today's interesting because of course today is all about leaders, whether leaders with their passion or leaders with their self-care. So how are leaders seen by the people within the firm? And I'm told by Andrew Kakabadze, who is one of our guests on the panelists, that these numbers are miles ahead of your typical PLC board, which gets nothing like these numbers. So, 0% said none of them were true. So in all cases, the leaders, they share options, they value the employees, they're sharing pain, they're accessible, and they're transparent. So, I mean, these are some messages which I think are quite positive about the leadership in our sector, because I know that people often treat us as unsung heroes, and maybe actually the reality is a little bit different. So I'll stop sharing now, and I will invite our first panelist, who, as I mentioned, mentioned before is Michael Chissick, who is the managing partner of Field Fisher, which is a very successful law firm, to come and talk to us about passion for his 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Morning, Richard. Morning, everyone. And thank you, Richard, for the past 34 episodes. I'm going to talk about passionate leadership. Now, passion is not normally something you hear much about in the workplace. And when you ask people, what are you passionate about? Most people will talk about a football team or a hobby or social justice. But I'm going to talk about bringing passion into the workplace. And I think in times of COVID and people working from home, it's even more important. And when I hear people say they're not happy at work, they're often saying, I'm no longer passionate about working. So there was a young trainee that I met when they were on the summer scheme, and their first seat was in private client tax. I went in to see the trainee, see how he was doing. He said, it's just not working for me. I'm not connecting with my line manager. I'm not really enjoying the seat. I joined the firm to do technology. So I gave him the John Gabara and John Cutter article on managing your boss, the most downloaded Harvard Business Review. And I gave him a few ideas about showing some enthusiasm and passion. Relationship turned around. Wasn't the best seat, but they had a good seat. So bringing passion into the workplace is increasingly important. Why? Well, passionate people tend to work harder. You want the people that wake up and bounce out of bed and want to go to work. It's energizing. You want people who strive for excellence and more motivated they work. And people who bring passion into the office tend to enjoy it. We talk a lot about improving the work environment. And often when we do that, we're talking about green walls and plants. But actually, passion in the workplace can be infectious. It's a very positive, inspiring force, contagious and motivational. It's a powerful emotion. It belongs in the managing partner's rulebook with values, authenticity, role modeling, culture. It's a way of transferring energy. And when leaders show conviction, it makes other people feel great. So how do you handle passion in the workplace? Well, you do need to tailor your passion to the environment and the situation. Someone comes to you with a new coffee machine. They don't want someone going, yeah, great, best thing in the world. So you need to tailor it. And if you're perhaps working with a partner, you want them to take on the project and you're very enthusiastic, you're a 10, and they're not so enthusiastic 5, you may need to dial your energy down to 7.5. So you do have to get passion right in the workplace. But let me just feel, what does it mean for us leaders? I think our job is to engender passion. And I don't mean giving lip service, just saying I'm passionate, I'm passionate, I'm passionate. It's about how you deliver things. So in terms of language, if you say we're going to provide a good service, why not change it to we're going to provide an exceptional service? Or rather than saying this project is going to make a difference, why not say this project is going to change the legal sector? So allocate projects to people who are passionate. So if you've got a D&I project, make sure you give it to someone who's interested in that, or an IT project, someone who's interested in that. So our role as leaders, I believe, is to inspire our firms by showing the right degrees of passion for key projects, people, corporate responsibility. So just to conclude, passion in the workplace can make a big difference, and can maybe end with a rallying call for managing partners. As we come into 2021 and we move into a world of vaccine and out of the challenges of 2020, bring passion into the workplace. You will find it motivational, contagious, inspirational, and hugely powerful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. And I don't think we've used that word passion in any of the previous episodes, and you probably used it at least 50 times. So you really made the point brilliantly. So thank you. And William, come and join us again. And William today is focusing a little bit more on self-care and resilience. And as I said earlier at the beginning, if you're not looking after yourself, then the likelihood is your firm will be in a suboptimal place.
I think it's absolutely right. I'd like to build on what Michael said there about passion. We've been training people, professional service firms, in cognitive and behavioral skills for about 30 years. And I think more than ever this year, what we've noticed is that with the senior people in a firm, that they are, as your poll suggests, paying a lot of attention to the people in the firm. But what we have noticed is that that's come at a cost of perhaps not paying enough attention to themselves. And this idea of self-awareness is, if you've heard me speak before, is one of the critical pillars of emotional intelligence. But it's also one thing that underpins resilience. And I'll talk a little bit about resilience this morning. I'm indebted to my friend Jane Clark, who wrote a book on resilience about 5 years ago, still worth reading. And I collaborated with her in the development of a resilience questionnaire, which this year they made available free to the NHS. And of course, it's been hugely popular this year, huge amount of interest in it. There are, in Jane's book, there are 5 elements she's identified of resilience, which are optimism, a solution orientation, accountability, openness and flexibility, and managing stress. And all of those are closely linked to developing emotional intelligence. And if you read the book, or if you read any references to it, she talks about 10 steps to increase your resilience. And they're very clear, and I think we're all very clear, that resilience can be increased. But one factor in increasing it, of course, is becoming aware of some aspects of your own behavior. So if I give you the top 10 tips for increasing your own personal resilience, number 1 is to visualize success. But that doesn't mean it's okay to have stretch goals, but people who are resilient tend to visualize realistic success rather than dreams. So they have something that's, you might call it smart objectives or tangible, but there's an element of realism about them. The second thing to boost your resilience is to boost your self-esteem. And it can be very easy for self-esteem to get degraded if you're constantly facing problems or tricky clients or difficult situations. So it's important in this sense to reflect upon your past achievements, your qualifications, your good qualities, and reset and rebalance to ensure that your self-esteem maintains at a reasonable level. The third thing is to take control. And by that I mean, be aware of your negative. We all have negative thoughts. Research psychologists sometimes call these drag anchors. They're things that we can often think that define our behavior. So in down moments, people can think that they're defined by their past, for example, or their childhood. And whilst they certainly have an influence, no one's defined by it. So it's important to take control of that, be aware of your drag anchors, and reframe. The fourth thing is to train yourself to become more optimistic. Even if you're a half full person, or half empty, I'm never quite sure which means which for that phrase. But even if you tend to look on the dark side, the Monty Python approach of looking on the bright side does work. There is always a shadow zone, of course, but if there's always a shadow zone, by definition, there's always a bright zone, a bright side. And so it is important to try to train yourself to become more optimistic. Managing stress is point number 5. That's really important for senior people. Self-awareness. Now, there are 2 ways to manage stress broadly. One is distraction, which means to involve yourself in extraneous activities, mindfulness, for example, music, walking, exercise. So distraction from stress. And the other heading under that is resolution, which is if something's bothering you, take action. Stuff that's left to fester doesn't get better on its own. So people who are resilient tend to manage stress by taking action. The phrase that I've often heard used, and I'm sure you have, is that if you eat a frog before breakfast, everything else tastes better for the rest of the day. The idea there being that deal with the difficult stuff early on. Improve your decision-making. And you can improve your decision-making by firstly identifying if you're an intuitive decision-maker, then investigate the rational side. And if you're a rational decision-maker, sometimes trust your gut a little bit more. So 2 aspects to decision-making, knowing which one you prefer, and then trying to cultivate the other side is one way to improve your resilience. Number 7 is one of probably the most difficult for senior people in professional service firms, and that is to ask for help. Because almost by definition, reaching a senior position means that you don't ask for help. So what we notice in resilient people, and what the studies show in resilient people, is that they're not afraid to ask for help. It doesn't disclose a weakness, but it does communicate a sense of vulnerability, which actually is a classic part of strong leadership. Number 8 is to deal with conflict. And I've seen this in a couple of occasions recently with some senior people that I'm coaching in a couple of law firms, where there have been situations which could have been addressed over the last 3 years, and they've been ignored. You've maybe heard me say before that cultures are defined by the behaviors that are tolerated. And in this unfortunate situation, they tolerated some behavior initially, which didn't seem too toxic, but has now got to a really difficult toxic situation, which has to be resolved. And if they'd have resolved it 3 years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation now. Tech number 9 is to learn and keep, what we notice with resilient people is they keep learning. They're very good at reflecting on their experience. And as Aldous Huxley said, experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. And if you're going to do something with what happens to you, you need to reflect upon it. And number 10 is to be yourself. And this means to get to the root of, we all suffer at some point in our careers from imposter syndrome. As Oscar Wilde said, be yourself because everybody else is taken. But to be yourself involves, again, developing your self-awareness. So those are the top 10 tips. If you want to look at the book, it's called Resilience by Jane Clark. She's part of Nicholson McBride, which is the foremost business psychologist in the UK. And John Nicholson's been my friend and mentor for 30 years, and he gave me my first ever job as a psychologist. So that's it.
Fantastic. Jeremy, we were talking about eating frogs before breakfast. I mean, what's your take on that?
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Michael and William, again, for two very insightful topics. Eating frogs before breakfast, I've never really thought about it in that way, but certainly making sure that you deal with the difficult matters as quickly and swiftly as possible certainly means that the outlook suddenly looks a little bit more rosy. So I guess I would agree with William's analysis there. Probably if I just make a couple of comments on a few of Michael's points and William's from our perspective at Hayes McIntyre. Certainly passion, I'm hopefully it comes across occasionally. I'm a very passionate individual. I think it's really important in our business. And if you look at the areas of our business, whether that's particular sectors or whether that's particular services, invariably the ones that have been the most successful are the ones that have had the most passionate leaders. And I think that it tells a massive story. And I think passion spreads. It becomes infectious and becomes really important. I suppose I would add that it needs to be controlled and occasionally needs to be managed because it can be misinterpreted. I have some very passionate colleagues who, because of their passion and drive and interest in the business, can at times be misconstrued, can at times be seen as negative, etc. And we just have to control that, and we have to manage that. So I think that's what I'd add there. And of course, in any business, you need a mix of people. We can't all be going around being really passionate all the time. We need that balance. We need a balance of individuals within the business as a whole, certainly within our management team, bringing different skills. But certainly, I would have passion high up as a skill requirement. In terms of resilience, I've noted down some of William's 10 points, some of which are ones for me to work on. So thank you very much for that, William. Some of which I certainly recognise and feel very strongly about. We have, as a business, again, with an element of balance, have tried to continue to remain optimistic, to visualise success, to remember that we were a really good firm before whatever day it was in March 2020, and we had to shut the office. We were a really good firm. We're a successful firm, and we will continue to be a successful firm. And we mustn't lose sight of that. As difficult as the challenges are at the moment, we need to remain optimistic. Of course, we need to remain cautious. We need to manage the situation appropriately. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we have been a good firm, and I'm absolutely confident that we will continue to be a good firm. In terms of just managing stress, again, a really important one. This week, and I think I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, we've had something called Hayes McIntyre Connect, which has been a series of events for staff to participate in. And one of our challenges as a firm was to do 5 million steps collectively, and we have a live counter on our intranet, so it's all very exciting. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that at 5 o'clock last Friday, I realized that I had not been out of the house since Monday morning, all week. So I'm pleased to report that this week I have, I'm heading towards probably 70,000 steps for the week. So it's been really good, a really good exercise. It's got people out, and it is good in terms of just de-stressing and getting away from the desk. So thank you both for your input. I must apologize in advance to the participants on the call that I do have to leave slightly early today. So if you see me disappear, it's for no sinister reason. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, it's called business as usual, isn't it? Francesca, good morning to you today. And passion and energy and positivism and all those other good things that I know you've been an exemplar of over the over the months of the show. Let's love to hear your input and thoughts on where we're at.
Thank you, Richard. That's very kind of you say that. Yeah, passion in the workplace. I mean, I'm a huge fan of something that Michael said that was just it feels self-evident but doesn't happen all that often, is giving the right person the right job. How often do you see someone who's got this massive energy and passion for something, they're just stuck in the wrong role, or they're not able to explore that? I also find that into the accounting profession, you've got some people who I have heard use the word passion, but they've done it in the least passionate way you could ever do. I used to have a wonderful colleague who was very, very good, and they used passion. They used the term passion lots, but they said it in such a dull way that you were kind of going, really? Do you mean passion, or do you mean something else? And so I think it's just, it's that authenticity that people who bring an excitement and enthusiasm don't always bring it in exactly the same way, but it doesn't mean they're any less passionate about what they do, but massively important about making sure people can reach their full potential in what they do. I loved all the stuff about resilience as well. I mean, we've been looking quite hard at this because I think resilience really speaks to what you need during the long, hard haul that this lockdown has been. And as you go into the next few months, particularly these cold winter months, if you're sitting in the Northern Hemisphere, you'll know just how difficult it might be for yourself and might be for your colleagues. And there's something there around that I had a lovely chat with someone who was referencing the joy that is the Harry Potter novels. I don't know if any of you have read them, or if your children have read them, or if you've got relatives who've read them, but there's a wonderful evil kind of creation in there called the Dementors, who suck your energy out, and I think we've all worked with a few of them. And as we're going through this next stage, keeping that energy, keeping your energy protected just feels massively important. And there are some real energy suckers, one of which is endless calls. And I'm a bit over back-to-back calls with like 2 seconds to grab a cup of coffee and go on to the next one. There's something there about protecting yourself from having all your time sucked into calls or sucked into something else, whatever it is that's eating up your time. How do you protect your time and therefore protect yourself? So that feels very important at the moment. Don't let the Dementors get you. Keep yourself protected from that.
I remember somebody saying to me once that actually one trick is to start a call at a strange time. So if you start a call at 10 to the hour and go for 60 minutes, then they've got time to get for the next one. And so there are various sort of, I think people get used to it after a bit, so it doesn't always work, but just could have surprised people occasionally. Michael, let's go back to you. Obviously, we've had a few people who came back to you on, do you have a bunch of clones? Can everybody be a passionate leader all the time? What's your sense on that one?
No, I agree with Francesca. You've got to get it right, and just saying I'm passionate doesn't work. It's living and breathing and knowing when to turn it on and turn it off. But being able to bring that element of yourself and authenticity into the place and show you really do care. So I think it's an incredibly powerful thing, and I think it's what a lot of professional service firms need now from that leaders. I think 2021, picking up on the optimism point, is going to be a very good year. And now is the time for us to build the building blocks to energize our firms, which isn't easy with everyone at home. But I think this is now the right time. I think it chimes with 2021 vaccines. There could be an economic recovery. Hopefully Brexit will be out of the way. So really, this is a time, I believe, where we should be resonating passion, optimism, enthusiasm, and picking up on Will's point, we can start to visualize real success is not that far away from us. So I hope that's something helpful.
Yeah, and William, I mean, can people be over exuberant, do you think? Sort of, where's the balance there? Because some people have said you need to sort of temper your passion.
Yeah, there's limits of arousal, where you can become excited or terrified. The classic thing is, of course, the Laffer curve relating to taxation. So you can raise tax up to a level and continue to raise revenue, but you raise taxes too high, people stop working, and so the revenue drops down. And it applies to lots of other disciplines. So too much, salt can make and sugar can make a food taste better, but too much, it makes it worse. A more vivid example is that a feather could be erotic, but the whole chicken maybe not so. So the point I'd like to pick up on, I think I want to come back to, I think last time you had me on, Richard, I had a bit of a rant. I was having a rant on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I got quite a lot of traction on it. If the most used phrase of 2020 is "you're on mute," the second most used phrase is "I'm back to back," which is borderline insanity. So the question, when people say that to me, "I'm back to back," my question is why, and who controls your diary? Herrero said, I was talking about him earlier, if you want to see a person's role, look at their Outlook calendar. And this idea of doing back-to-back is wrong at so many levels. When do you prepare? When do you write the notes up? When do you reflect? When do you go to the bathroom? What signal does it send to the rest of the firm? It is insanity. And I had a real rant about this on Twitter, and had about, I don't know, a few thousand replies and comments and likes. And the third now most infuriating phrase after "you're on mute" and "I'm back to back" is "next slide, please." Get a clicker. Like, what? How much is it? Can't the government afford a clicker? Rant over.
Thank you. Jeremy, do you have any pet rants you want to share?
Nearly missed it then.
I was going to say he's on mute.
No, I don't think so. Not at the moment. I can't obviously think of any off the top of my head, but I certainly take on board William's comments about back-to-back meetings, which at times my own diary feels like that, and perhaps that's something I need to address. But no specific rants, I don't think.
I'm still laughing about the chicken. I love that. That image won't get off my mind for a while. But there is something about the way you can protect yourself, isn't there? And I think, William, you always flag that really well, is that a lot of these are issues of our own making. So the start of the pandemic, the equating being busy was about being on lots of calls. I am sure we were all a little bit guilty of showing that we were very present by slamming shed loads of calls into our diaries. But kind of we're over that now, aren't we? And I think there's something hugely powerful about going, I just don't need to be on that call. There's people much better than me to be on it. Or why have I got 5 hours of complete calls with no break between? What's that about? And people are so unproductive when they just lurch from one meeting to the next. I was on a call last night. Now, obviously, I work in interesting time zones. I was on a call at 7 o'clock last night, and I'm sure 2 of the people were asleep because I think they'd just been up for hours. And you're just going, this is crazy. So, taking William's point, this actually sits on my desk. This is my frog. And I look at this every day because I think the most important thing you can do is do the rubbish stuff first in your day, then everything else is more positive. And one of my promises to myself is I'm going to look at the diary for next week and make sure I'm not back to back.
Brilliant. Jeremy, I think you're probably heading off now, aren't you? So thank you very much for your contribution today and for all the shows you've been on during the year. We hope to have you back next year. So
absolutely delighted. Thank you very much, everyone.
And have a great Christmas. Bye for now.
And you. Bye.
So Michael, switching back to some things we were talking about, do you have a pet rant that you feel is?
Well, my pet rant would be kind of linking into resilience, which is the inability for us, or the way we've succumbed to not meeting in person. And what's worked for me on resilience is I get my board into the office. Most of us come in and I do walks with colleagues. And my particular rant is how we've all just gone to our homes with such enthusiasm. And the government says, work from home if you can. I don't think you can run complex organizations and make big decisions sitting on Zoom calls. So my particular rant is, let's get back into the office. The city centers are dying and we're letting it happen. So if anything, just to tie in, let's get meeting again in person. There is no reason why we can't safely meet in offices.
Fantastic. William, again, from your thoughts in terms of that move back to the office. I mean, all the research we've seen suggests that people are very apprehensive about it unless it's carefully managed. Came out again on various polls we've run. I mean, what do you think is going to be necessary for those attitudes to change?
Well, I think when I was on last time, I spoke about, I mentioned the New York Times article about how we're all becoming socially awkward. I think there's one of the challenges that operating virtually for so long, people lose some elementary social skills. So one of my other rants was about how people seem to have become less polite, dare I say even rude, because they're protected by the virtual screen. And the New York Times article was saying that there's an element of hostage syndrome, where people being released back into society have lost a lot of their basic social skills. And I think that is going to be part of the problem. Firstly, people will be frightened. It's like the analogy was releasing a zoo animal into the wild, back into the wild. It's going to take them time to adapt to whatever the new normal is, whatever that phrase means. But going back to the office, getting on trains, mingling, because people have been away from it for a long time. And like any skill or behavior, if you don't use it, it's going to degrade. So I think there is going to be a challenge. And I think it's important not to underestimate how uncomfortable people will feel. And a lot of people won't be able to explain this discomfort, but they certainly will be feeling it. They'll be feeling awkward, uncomfortable, unbalanced in a new environment. And of course, what will exacerbate that is that they will also feel that they shouldn't be feeling that because that was the environment they were operating in before. So there'll be this classic cognitive dissonance going on. And I think that's something to be aware of, that it isn't going to be just a case of, okay, we can all come back to the office, because people are going to feel very uncomfortable.
I mean, do you think it's going to go as far as brains being rewired? I mean, because there's a lot of neuroscience which talks about plasticity of brains and how people's habits form after a month or two and then become actually much harder to reverse, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think brains have been rewired. I think we've all been rewired to some extent. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I laughed when Jeremy said, he hadn't been out of the house for a week. because I can remember probably before the pandemic, he might have heard the complaint, you haven't been in the house for a week. It's just flipped around the other way. I think we've all learned new behaviors, and not all of them are positive. Some of the behaviors have been a little more introverted and introspective. So I think adaptive, we'll adapt again. That's part of the human condition. We are very, very adaptive. But to think it's going to happen just because, as our esteemed leader said, the pandemic doesn't know it's Christmas. Just because you say, okay, 1 minute past midnight, you can now go back to the office. It means nothing in terms of a sense of behavior. It's just a point in time.
Yeah, it's a bit like that. Was it Watson didn't know it had won the game of Jeopardy? I think going way back into the sort of the IT world, which was a great New York headline. Michael, what's your thoughts on how are you going to assuage people's apprehension over going back to the office and all the psychological issues that they may be less aware of?
Yeah, I think there are some challenges. I think people have got used to a very flexible approach to their working day, which I applaud. But I think it is going to be a challenge for people to spend 9 to 6 without walking the dog and doing a bit of yoga. I've been in a minority about managing partners. I always took the government's advice to work from home if you can, meaning we can go into the office where we are doing certain types of work. So I think we do need to gently encourage people to experiment, come back into the office. We're talking 1 day a week gradually. But I think it's down to leadership. Everyone knows that I'm in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they can come and see me and have a chat, go for a walk, have a coffee. So I think it's going to need to come top down to encourage people to start to come back. But I don't think we need to wait for the government to say, yes, you can go back into the office. It's there in my interpretation of the rules that we are able to work in the office when you can't work from home.
I think technically they're guidelines, aren't they, as well? So you can probably ignore them, but I'm never quite sure about the legal issues. Not that that's really to that you're a lawyer and I'm not. So Francesca, your thoughts around how you go about helping people, and in a way you have a slightly different situation, I guess, because some parts of the global network in Grant Thornton have been back in the office. Parts of the East Asia you'd hardly have known there was the thing had even happened. So how do you balance that across your network? That'll be interesting to hear.
I mean, you've got everything, every range under the sun. You've got some offices that were never really ever shut down. Vietnam, they've been open pretty much throughout. Hong Kong is almost 100% back. You can go right around all 129 countries we're in. You could go around. There's a different story to tell. But I think there's a commonality approach that giving that flexibility for people to have a choice about what they felt most comfortable about. So there's some countries like Brazil that never really had full-on lockdown. Interesting political decisions there, but people took their own view about whether they felt safe being in the cities at certain times, and certainly our office let people work from home if they wanted to. There's something intriguing, and I think it comes through in the questions that are in the Q&A today as well. It says this piece around behavioural change, and some of it is a result of the situation you're in, and some of it is you're trying to transform. You are trying to transform the change, and that's the hardest piece, isn't it? If you want to get to whatever the new world looks like, there is going to be some behavioural change that is going to have to be encouraged by senior leadership. And I think the biggest piece, it's not, obviously there's role modelling and there's clarity and there's foresight. And I think there's also patience, because changing people's behaviour is the hardest thing to do. So the expectation that you can make a change swiftly is very, very difficult to achieve unless all the stars align. Interestingly, the pandemic has created rapid change, but most change actually has to happen over a longer period of time, because there isn't the same burning platform, there isn't the same necessity to change quickly. And if you're trying to drive that behavioural change, that means you do need also to have a huge dose of patience.
Yeah, and then there's another view, possibly extreme, which is you can't get people to change. People only change when they want to. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that, William. We've got a question here about, it's almost the trade-off between, can you train yourself to be passionate without appearing to be inauthentic? And at the same time, are you then setting a role model or an example which people know to be a little bit dissonant with what they normally expect to be your behavior?
Well, I think we had a discussion before we started about the definition of passionate. I think there's something, without getting all sort of zen, there is something about being present and focusing on stuff that perhaps you don't find terribly interesting or energizing. And a lot of that is to do with focus and being present, and that comes back to the whole idea of mindfulness and stress reduction. So I think you can certainly train yourself to be more optimistic, in that every time a shadow thought appears, you can think about what the other side, the shadow of the shadow is, if you like, the light side of it. Passion, I'm not sure. You can certainly train yourself to be present and to be focused. But it depends. We're back to this definition of passion. Inauthentic passion is difficult, I think, and it also becomes, people are aware of it. You can notice when somebody's being falsely passionate or enthusiastic. So then you've got back to this idea of authenticity. And as Woody Allen said, if you can fake authenticity, then you've got it cracked. But it's a bit tricky. So I think you can certainly train yourself to be focused and attentive on stuff that perhaps isn't necessarily going to light your fire.
Thanks very much. Well, sadly, I think that's now come to the end of today's show. So I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank, obviously, Jeremy, who sadly had to leave early. I'd like to thank Michael for coming and talking us about passion. And it's really been inspired, I think, the whole of today's session, which has been great. I'd like to thank Francesca for her 33 appearances on 34 shows, which is an amazing, amazing feat. And we hope that you will be joining us next year. I'll be talking to you about that a bit later today, which will be great. And William for coming in and just kind of unwrapping some of those things that we're not always sure about in a way that was very clear, very precise, and I thought was really helpful. And yeah, we can't all suddenly become passionate leaders if we don't believe in what we're doing, I think is my simple view. And that comes back to how firms select their leader, which is another whole bundle of fun, which I'm sure we'll pick up next year because there's no shortage of topics. So what comes next? Well, we've got a North Shoring Summit, which is fundamentally around how you cope in a virtual world. Do you open up new offices? Do you share work? Do you partner between independent firms? Or do you actually hire people in different places? And we've got our awards coming up next year. We've got a Portuguese firm that showed interest today. So please, please, please get involved in that if you can. All the I hear from experts, the 5-minute slots are now available. There's over 70 of them. You'll recall Mark and Ian from last week, so that's great. So they're up there, and the other two will be up in a day or two. And obviously, if you want to watch the full recordings, you can see those in the management library. So it only really remains to say, hope you found today valuable. Please encourage your peers to book on the show, and that's the link. And not back till 8th of January. So we're taking the month of December off. So that's quite a news flash for you. But we're going to take some time. We're going to be talking to some of the listeners, finding out what we're doing right, things we could be improving. And then we'll be back with a sort of show on the 8th of January, which is a Friday, to see in the new year with Brexit behind us and all sorts of other stuff. So I don't even want to go there. But thank you all again for being an amazing audience. And I've enjoyed being your host for the last 34 weeks and look forward to doing so for such time as you continue to find it useful, because ultimately it's the clients and nobody wins arguments with them. So thank you again for that, and we'll wish you all a fantastic Christmas. Bye for now.
Thanks.